we were able to arrange. So we're going to just, for about half an hour this morning, turn our attention to, I've lost track of bill numbers here, Representative Pearl's bill, H 74, and hear a little bit about some folks who are involved with curriculum. So why don't we'll do a quick introduction so you know who we are, and then you guys can jump in. I'm David Durfee. I represent Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and Sunderland, Bennington County.
I'm Heather Supernant. I represent Windsor 4, which is Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
Hi, I'm Esme Cole. I represent Windsor 6, which is Hartford.
I'm John O'Brien. I represent Windsor Orange 1, which is Royalton, and my hometown of Tunbridge.
Mike Rice, represent Bennington, Rutland District, Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
I'm Josie Levitt. I represent Grand Isle Chittenden, which is all of Grand Isle County and a sliver of West Milton.
It was there. I'm David Templeman. I represent Barton, Brownington, and Westmore.
I'm Charles Wilson, represent Caledonia 3, which is Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, Newark, and Linden.
Henry Pearl, I represent Danville, Peacham, and Cabot.
Jed Lipsky, represent Lamoille 1, so.
Rodney Graham, represent Orange 3, which is Williamstown and Chelsea.
Fine.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm Gwen Carmoli. I'm the Director of Curriculum in Colchester and the President of the Vermont Curriculum Leaders. And I'm here with my colleague, Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff Evans. I'm the Executive Director of VIT Club, or Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association, and a former administrator and former curriculum director at Champlain Valley School District.
We are here today really to provide a message of thank you and awareness of the, I would say, stressors, unprecedented stressors that schools have at this time. We are very appreciative of the agriculture around the state, the interest in nutrition, of the many amazing programs like Farm to School. And we are also really aware of how overfilled our educators are at this moment. Coming off the pandemic, they are doing recovery, they are doing social emotional learning, they are, so there's academic social emotional learning, there are a lot of family and caregiver concerns. And there's a huge amount of professional development happening at this time. So as we were considering this bill, there were so many wonderful aspects of it. And there's a how in the world can we add more requirement at this time? So that's our frame of mind at this point.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think Gwen said it best just a few minutes ago to me, that we want to make sure we're sending a message of support and the fact that systems right now are overwhelmed in terms of curriculum. And so one of the things we wanted to point out is that in the mix also this year are bills that are under consideration that add curriculum around financial literacy, Holocaust education, and computer science. We want to point out three specific things. And one is this current statewide requirements, knowing that Jessica Carolus spoke to you a while back. So without being too redundant about that, there are content standards that require that each school provides appropriate learning opportunities to all students to support their attainment of the standards approved by State Board of Ed. And EQS, Education Quality Standards, and Act 77 require local school boards to establish a written curriculum that allows them to demonstrate proficiency in the following content areas: literacy, mathematical content practice, science, global citizenship, phys ed, health ed, artistic expression. All of those, so we have to provide appropriate learning opportunities for all of those in the context of 7.5 hours a day, 175 days a week, and also build in things like lunch, recess, advisories, intervention blocks for the students who need those extra supports. And so the message there is there are a number of requirements already that have filled our plates, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the new dynamics in the last few years that have made that more difficult.
Representative O'Brien's got a question.
Oh, sure.
Just a quick one, since we're the ag committee and
Yeah.
not education.
Sure.
Where does this association fit in the sort of education universe? I'm just trying to get some context.
Yeah, so, there's the Vermont Superintendent's Association, the Special Educators Association. These are the curriculum leaders of each district. So each district has a curriculum director who is in charge of curriculum instruction and assessment within their supervisory union or district. This is the collection of all of those folks that we work with.
So it's under the Agency of Education you work, or is it?
No, we're hired and we're hired by our local districts and school boards, but we come together as a networking and advocacy group.
So, yeah, good question to sort of establish.
Sure.
And then, so the curriculum directors that your organization consists of and that you represent as executive director, those folks are typically in the central office of the supervisory union.
That's correct.
They might be would they be an assistant superintendent? Is it that?
And some systems call them that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say there are probably about 30 different titles that we hold, but usually it's somewhere in the Office of Curriculum. Sometimes it's an assistant superintendent, sometimes it's a director of learning, sometimes it's a director of curriculum, but we are all working, as you said, curriculum instruction. And then assessment. We have a brand new statewide assessment coming next week also. So we're very busy right now.
What's that mean?
The new statewide assessment, Smarter Balance, was our previous statewide assessment, which all students in grades 3 through 9 and then grade 11 in science take. Science takes it in grade 5, 8, and 11. Grades 3 through 9 take it in literacy and mathematics. And we have this brand new online assessment that was announced in late November and is being implemented live next week on Wednesday. And so it's a huge pivot for every classroom to do the training for every classroom to do this brand new assessment. So we're highly, highly supportive of nutrition and partnerships between schools and agriculture, and recognize that there's a lot of different agriculture around the state. And terrific programs, but new requirements are almost beyond capacity of our schools. We have almost no time to fit in what we currently have. And so the thought of additional curriculum in multiple areas that actually already sits inside our requirements is our concern. Our thought is there a way that we could incentivize some of the great programs like Farm to School and offer more of that where it not be a mandate, but it's an incentive, a grant opportunity, a way to slide it in as some supplemental curriculum that could fit into existing standards. We have standards in literacy and in mathematics and science. Next Generation Science has a whole section on sustainability. We have the SHAPE standards, which are physical education, and our nutrition standards, our health standards. We have standards that sit there and requirements. Is there a way we could fit it in some way, add additional resources? So our message is we love the idea, and how can we do it without adding additional mandate?
So I think that we're more or less in the same page.
Okay.
And would be interested in hearing more from you if you have thoughts on what those incentives might look like. So I think, yeah, we understand the lay of the land. Also, I guess, recognizing that we're very cognizant of the situation that schools are in now coming out of the pandemic, that hopefully anyway, that won't always be the case, and that there will be room down the road for as the world changes and as education evolves to do things somewhat differently than they're being done today. So given that, given the way things work, any thoughts that you have on, incentivizing or getting existing programs like Farm to School? And we haven't heard from those folks as far as this bill goes. we've got them scheduled to come in maybe tomorrow.
Oh, okay, we're there. They're terrific. I would say some opportunities for schools to, one of the things that has happened is our schools are so busy doing so many things, they don't have a chance to get actually outside and do field trips and pieces like that, or transportation is an issue. If there's a way to incentivize it in some way, if, there are lots of agricultural opportunities, but getting the students there is the challenge. So that's an idea of an incentive, like offering ways to support field trips to various things, partnerships with organizations, so agricultural partnerships with your school lunch, I noticed that Farm to School is tied in with early education, which is terrific. So pre-K, sponsoring some of the breakfast pieces, like, is there a way to highlight the many different kinds of agriculture that are happening within something that's happening at the school, and that could receive some funding that, I guess I would say funding for is an example of incentive. Tying it into some existing really successful programs. We're doing a lot of expansion of after school summer programs, and then pre-K or early education is a hot topic here at the General Assembly right now. So is there a way to tie some things into that? Yes.
No, thank you. I usually wait for him to give permission.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Templeman.
So I'm curious about your vocational programs at the high school level. I could imagine there's a lot of flexibility there. Given that actually I'm working with a farm teacher in a vocational program with a local high school. And she's had a lot of success and flexibility in, involving, is that a place where there's more flexibility, more malleability within your existing structure, where we could implement something and not disrupt your normal course of business?
Perhaps. I think internship opportunities, ways in which you can do that real world experience, maybe something that CTE can do, the technical centers could do more than the general curriculum could. But I might say we have opportunities from grade 7 on for personalized pathways and for the personal learning plans, where students could come and spend time at any of the agricultural places and earn some, start demonstrating some of their proficiency. So internships are an opportunity, partnerships, I think developing some supplemental curriculum that could match up with the SHAPE standards or a course or part of a unit of study within the CTE or high school programs, I think are a great idea. I can't speak to the amount of flexibility because they have a different set of requirements that are a little tighter, but they also have some flexibility to go deep into a content area.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention is that a while back, the state made an investment through Act 77 in personalizing learning, differentiating instruction to meet the needs of all learners. And so this idea is that we have to determine where learners are, where their passions lie, and make sure that we try to help folks acquire and demonstrate proficiency through those lenses of things they're passionate about and different ways of learning and developing these skills. And when I read this bill, that's where my mind goes in many regards, is that a lot of schools, particularly middle levels, are struggling to find enough resources to help students truly do internships, get out into the field, have authentic learning experiences where they're applying the things that they're learning. It's a little easier in high school, but there's still a lot of limitations. We have very rural schools, as you know, and so transportation's an issue. And if a student's going to spend a couple hours every school day working in the field, how do you support that? How do you facilitate that?
Representative Rice. And then...
Yeah. So I guess two things. One is something we talk a lot about in here, in this context and other contexts, in terms of farm to school programming, is that so much that we hear seems to be based on the presence of sort of a specific person in a school, right? This teacher runs this great program at this school and it's an incredible resource for that community. But how do we, if we're not making it a mandated part of curriculum, how do we sort of take that personnel piece out and actually try to make sure that these programs are in place at all of the schools instead of just a few where there happens to be a really talented person combined with the resources to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
And then the second part is sort of related is, I think we want to do those really deep learning pieces where somebody discovers a passion and gets to spend lots of time in an internship or something. But we're also trying to chase, we hear sort of anecdotally about kids at school in Vermont who have no idea where their food comes from, who think, geez, the process of making cheese starts at the grocery store, all these things. And how do we address those kids too? The ones who might not be choosing the technical pathway or dive into an internship or discover a passion, but just get that baseline learning in, again, in a place where maybe the resources and the personnel aren't there to sort of meet them where they're at and bring them along.
Yeah, I was thinking about that resource. I would say resource that's available for all schools, all students. So, and it could be video series that kids watch that are really highlighting, and it could be beekeepers, it could be the apple orchards, it could be. There's a lot of different agriculture around the state, and so how do we highlight that and get kids excited about it and make it accessible for any teacher to do, any grade level? And you can do it by grade span. It doesn't have to be specific to a particular grade, but it could be this is an elementary series that anyone could have available, and it fits in with the nutrition standards and with the science standards. That would be terrific. And I think it's something that people would use, and it could highlight Vermont. I mean, I think that's in one of those amazing partnerships. So you can sort of bring the field trip to kids. That's one way. Another way is to create some opportunities for kids for school systems to get excited about it. Like, how could it, and it could be small events that become bigger, an introduction to something. I guess those are the two big ideas. So if there's a resource that could be available and that could reach the system and the students, I would say. Just creating curriculum isn't enough. It has to be somewhat exciting to students, and they have to be able to have the vision of this is what I don't know yet. And then small opportunities to excite staff. My daughter was part of Farm to School in one of her in her elementary school, and she came home one day. She said, "Mom, I really want tomatillas." She was so excited about it. Now we've been having it but it wasn't exciting to her until someone else brought it in. She got to cut it up and practice it with salsa. That was fabulous. It was a fantastic example. It came from Common Roots. I live in South Burlington. I'm not in a rural area, and yet it took someone else exciting her about it. I thought that was fabulous, and the Common Roots program is terrific, and they spent time in schools and with the lunches and getting kids excited. And then I noticed they were at the farmers market, and then they show up at the food shelf. They're engaged in the community. So I would say opportunities for engagement.
And I want to speak to your first point of programs being so person dependent, which is absolutely true. In my old school, there's a sustainability and forestry program, which is phenomenal, but it was 3 teachers who were really passionate about it, knowledgeable about it, and a number of students love it. It is an elective program. And so I think that you really captured that tension between allowing students to be autonomous and develop these paths, and what is a baseline understanding you want everybody to have. And that's where it really bumps into so many of these challenges where we have math standards and literacy standards and science standards, where we are mandated to make sure that that baseline understanding exists across the board. And as we add those baseline understandings, we're forced to say, but should that be couched in electives and in passion projects and in students being more autonomous about making those decisions about what I really want to learn and become more immersed in?
Representative Graham and Representative O'Brien.
So I would think that under the physical education piece, that would be a great place for nutritional And that starts from kindergarten up, pre-K probably up. And, you know, the importance of eating a nutritional meal, you know, a carrot versus a candy bar, any physical activity, because it doesn't have to be for sports, but hiking, swimming, running around the backyard. You know, it seems like that would be a great place to stick something in that area. And then maybe as they get a little older, into the health education.
Yeah, so perhaps there's a way to build some supplemental curriculum that can match up with those standards that fit with the nutrition, the PE standards, the shape standards, actually one set of standards. And I love the idea. We want kids to be active and outside and learning how the foods that we eat make a big difference in the health that we have.
And there is a requirement right now that all students take health education, and built into that health education curriculum is some nutrition standards. And the nutrition standards are also embedded into the physical education shape standards that students experience throughout their entire K-12 career, because that is one of the few places where minimum amount of time is mandated for physical education.
Representative O'Brien was next.
So just to shift from agriculture for a second, could you explain just when we do mandate something like the Holocaust awareness education, right? Or something that I never had in high school, financial literacy. I don't know if it's a consensus or it's a mandate now, but just describe how as curriculum leaders you work these into.
Yeah, I would say in those are two of the bills that are under consideration right now and are not currently mandates. There are pieces. So the way it currently works right now is that our curriculum is developed locally, but we must develop in a way that meets the standards that have been adopted by the State Board of Ed. Okay. And so the way that this would work is that new standards would be embedded into the existing body of education quality standards. And then we, as we develop our curriculum, would have to figure out how to make some shifts to make sure that students are being given those learning opportunities to learn and meet those standards. So it really is less, and the way it's typically worked, it's less about go build a curriculum around this topic and more around make sure all kids, when they graduate, can demonstrate X, Y, and Z relative to financial literacy, agriculture, Holocaust education, et cetera.
And then on the ground, what that looks like in every school system, and sometimes it's within a school system, every school starts developing curriculum. And so we take the mandates, and when the new ones are in, we have to design, and each school system is building those. And we can do it in varied ways, or sometimes it doesn't get done, or we crowd out some other pieces. And I think what ends up happening is, and one of the reasons that curriculum resources can be really helpful is it can make it consistent, and it can take the burden off the schools in some way by creating it and making it available, that resource available. And it frees up the time actually to do the instruction and planning of how to fit that in, as opposed to how do we create it.
So a resource is something that you might purchase off the shelf.
Potentially, there are, for math and literacy, there are programs like that. So that's one possibility. When you were speaking earlier about it being so person dependent, what would be helpful if a system was really interesting in doing more around sustainability, for instance, to have a resource where that has been built in conjunction with the AOE by people like the ones I just mentioned earlier, so that teachers who are interested within systems or systems are interested, they could go to that and it can be instructive. For instance, right now, there's an RFP out for curriculum design, to design literacy curriculum for folks. And the challenge there is, and Gwen's our literacy expert, is to what degree do we expect districts to interact with this? Is it, here's your curriculum, or is it, here's a model curriculum, you can borrow the pieces from it that you need to supplement what now is not as robust as you'd like it to be?
One thing I would add is it's really helpful if it's available without cost. I think right now we have extra dollars with the federal dollars that are coming in, but in about a year, in September 24, those dollars go away. So if there are dollars you could use now to create a resource that 5 years from now, a school system could use, and it could be equitably used and available for any school system. I think we recognize there are large ones, there are small ones. I do have to run downstairs. I'm the chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy, and I am so appreciative of your time. And Jeff, I'll let you keep going.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Gwen.
Cool, and then we've got a couple others who have questions, and then we'll have to wrap it up just because we're running tight here.
Did you say that the SHAPE requirements were new? This is a new program that you had to start?
No, SHAPE has been rebranded, but I can't remember what the name of them was before that, but about 2015, they became SHAPE. And so those are simply the standards that drive physical education instruction.
And so I wonder with that rebranding, if the standards for nutrition have changed or if that has, I don't know, been adjusted with.
I think there have been some adjustments and, I didn't dive deeply into which nutrition standards exist where. I think Jessica Carolus did give you links, I think, in her testimony that allows you to find where some of those exist. But yeah, I think that if you would like a deeper dive, looking at the SHAPE standards and finding where nutrition exists and what that continuity looks like from the younger grades all the way up. And they really exist in the health education standards, which all high school students must take.
And one other question too is that I know that the youth risk behavioral survey includes questions about nutrition. And I'm wondering if that informs requirements or around.
What it really informs, it can. Yes, to answer your question, it does for those who are responsible for developing the health ed standards. Some of the science teachers embedding more nutrition agriculture into science instruction. But the bigger piece is it informs our responses to supporting kids and families through the counselors, through the social emotional learning leaders, admin teams. They look at that very closely and start looking for trends so that we can be a little bit more supportive for folks when it comes to, in this case, nutrition. And I think that Universal Meals has made a big difference recently. And I also think that food service programs across the state have become much, much, much more cognizant of good nutrition, and the requirements by a number of organizations have made a big difference.
Representative Lipsky and Representative Templeman, and I think we'll wrap it up.
I appreciate your presentation. Under the EQS standards in Act 77, your fourth bullet is global citizenship.
Yep.
And I sat on a lot of school board, 10 years worth, and I don't see anything about history in any of these six. Is that
lives within global citizenship? So when you go to that resource, it explains its social studies and its world language.
They're just new terms.
Yep, it is.
And the other thing, I read the final paragraph, and the bullets on that I think are very helpful to this committee.
Well, thank you.
Because when we launched this, we were naive to really comprehend the impacts on curriculum and the complexities of that. So I think these are some really practical recommendations.
Thanks.
And you're alluding to testimony that I think we might have on our committee page.
It may be.
Yeah, okay.
So we've been talking about an existing structure that H274 may plug into and how that best can happen. Though for me, I'm kind of, I'm not from the education world. The base curriculum, where does that come from? Is that mandated by the federal government? Is this something you and your staff intelligently, create Vermont,
right?
At the Vermont level?
Right.
What's the What's the base level curriculum and where does it come from?
Yeah, so it comes from the State Board of Ed through the education quality standards. So we have education quality standards, and it's a massive list of standards essentially. And where they get those, it comes from them adopting different sets of national standards. Common Core is math and literacy, for instance. NGSS is science. NCAS is arts and music. And so it goes on and on. SHAPE is physical education. So these are nationally built bodies of standards that the state has adopted and said, you will implement these, okay, to help you meet these standards that are in education quality standards. Essentially saying, these are the content areas, and they're clusters, as you just pointed out, that all students must demonstrate proficiency in by the time they leave your system in 12th grade. And so that's where the base comes from. Then it's our job to figure out, okay, now let's come up with a vertical alignment. So what's it look like in first grade, and how does it build in second and third and fourth to meet these standards in these content areas?
So those federal standards, when you agree to participate with them, is there some funding that comes along with that from the federal government? And
there's been in the EQS and in Act 77, there has been little funding that has been associated with this. Essentially, the state has to, through ESSER, Every Student Succeeds Act, has to develop a plan that shows that students are being exposed to a chance to be proficient at all of this stuff, okay? And so each state has put together a plan, and our plan is through the education quality standards. That was Vermont's response to this. We built education quality standards, and here's how we hold our systems accountable for making sure that students are getting those appropriate opportunities.
so if I may make a metaphor and then I'll
Sure,
stop.
yeah.
So it sounds like the feds are the architect and you're the builder.
I think that's probably fair. And I would say that the state would argue that the feds might have broken ground and then the state had to build a house.
Yeah, got it.
And we have to make sure everybody gets fed.
Thank you.
I just have a follow-up to Dave.
Sure, we're still waiting for our next witness, so if you don't mind, another question.
I just, you touched on it. How does accountability work, both at the standards level, I guess it's
Yeah.
assessments to some extent, but also SU curricula? Is there pushback ever, like this curriculum isn't working to meet these standards?
Yeah, it's layered. The way I also teach a data class at St. Mike's to grad students. And the way I always present it to them is that you want to triangulate data and you want different measures. And so the first one is that federal or state measure, which is the state assessment that we just talked about. We give every year, it gives us information on students on math, science, literacy, et cetera. And then you want a local assessment. And so all districts have to create a local assessment system that says, here's your curriculum. How do you know what they know and what they can do? And so we have a system in my old school district that assesses kids 3 times a year on that, okay? And we use that data to inform curriculum decisions within. And then that other level is that classroom. We all grew up on report cards, and so it's that classroom assessment where the teachers are saying, here's what I'm seeing every day from the student. And so you take those 3 data points, triangulate them, and draw some conclusions about how well you're doing. Thanks for that question.
Representative Supernant's got a question.
Thank you. I'm not sure how this fits into curriculum, but I know that a lot of schools require service learning projects and then senior projects. And I'm curious about how this could potentially fit into a model like that. Of course, we don't want to mandate what kids are doing for their service learning projects, but where does that fit into the statewide curriculum, and how do schools go about making that happen?
Yeah, at this point, districts have been given the autonomy to determine how are you asking students to demonstrate this proficiency before you hand that diploma to them. And many systems have said, well, we're going to build our classroom instruction based on these standards, and students are going to be assessed throughout and instructed and have to demonstrate it. And they're going to have to do a capstone project or a service learning project, which often can be the same thing. And so it's an effort by schools to say, okay, you're demonstrating in a classroom, we're all sitting in seats together, but get out there in the field and work with an expert on this and apply it in the field also. And so there's that dual expectation. So not all districts have created capstone projects, but most of them have.
Other questions? Representative Levitt, if you're still listening in, did you have any questions?
No, thanks. I'm all set.
Okay. All right. Well, we appreciate your time this morning and really appreciate it because we weren't sure what we were going to do at 9:30.
I was joking with Laura, that TBD there and we D.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and we appreciate the work that you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you.